Hello anime fan, welcome back to What If Animes 2.0. So in this video you gonna see, what if Naruto was raised by shadows and serpents? This is part 1. And if you want more, then hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. So let's getting the video, and do check out the author of the story. The Fire Country's hidden village of Konoha was well known throughout the shinobi for various reasons. It was known for its many remarkable ninjas that it produced throughout the years, among them the revered Hokages, sworn to protect the village with their own lives if need be, the infamous Orochimaru and his two equally famous teammates, Jiraiya and Tsunade, the feared White Fang, and his son, Kapi Nin Kakashi. The village was also known for its well-tested and productive training regimes, as well as the easy life that many villagers and shinobi enjoyed at the village. What was not well known, however, was the pure amount of barely restrained malice the villagers were able to harbor for a certain 13-year-old boy. It had been bad earlier, when the boy was younger, and the villagers' hatred was still fresh. The hatred usually manifested itself as only a harsh prejudice or avoidance, leaving the boy confused and lonely. However, on several occasions in his childhood, the young boy suffered attacks from the very people he hoped to protect as a Konoha ninja. One such attack occurred when the boy, Uzumaki Naruto, was only 3 years old. It was one of the earliest attacks Naruto could remember, and he wasn't sure there had been other attempts on his life even before then. He had been returning home after talking to the old man, who is better known as the Sandaime Hokage. The discussion between the old man was about the possibility of Naruto leaving the orphanage, where the young boy had currently been living, in another year. Synonymous with hunger, freezing cold nights with moth-eaten blankets, and a verbally, and sometimes physically, though Naruto never spoke up, abusive caretaker. Naruto was ecstatic to hear of the possibility to leave the orphanage and live on his own. The old man himself would have trusted people make sure he bought the right food and clothes. The attack had happened quickly. He had just got into sight of the orphanage and was quickening his pace to reach the door before he was late for supper. The caretaker didn't like when he was late, and would sometimes keep him from eating dinner that night to teach him the importance of being on time. Suddenly a heavy hand gripped his shoulder, holding him back like reins. Naruto looked behind him to see a group of 3 men smirking at him. Each wore the headband of Konoha, and they each had various weapons in their hands. Naruto tried to wrench his shoulder out of the one man's grip, but was held in place, the grip becoming alarmingly painful on his shoulder. No words were spoken. One man swung him back and held him back as the other 2 men took turns beating the boy. Naruto had never been hit before, and a full-grown man's fist, much less a ninja's, was a pain he had never felt before. Then one man took out a kunai, reaching forward and slashing his face and through his lip. Blood gushed out and poured into his mouth, choking him and cutting him off mid-scream. Throughout it all, dark thoughts screamed at Naruto to kill them. Make them feel pain that was 1,000 times worse for doing this to him. Off to the side, Naruto was dimly aware of the matron of the orphanage standing outside the front door, with an odd expression on her face, something Naruto would later recognize as vindictive. It had seemed like he had been in pain for hours by the time he finally felt the blows stopped, though he knew in reality it was only minutes, if not moments. He realized the next slash of the knife hadn't come, and looked up to see the man who had saved him from his personal hell before falling unconscious. His savior had appeared in the form of a large bear-sized man, with a dark trench coat and bandana over his head. He held the assailant's hand in his fist, and wordlessly clenched his fist tight. An audible crunch sounded and the attacker fell to his knees and screamed from the bones in his hand being slowly crushed. Around the entire group was a squad of ninjas wearing masks, each painted to look like a certain animal or monster. The man in the bandana scooped Naruto up into his arms, ignoring the blood that seeped through his sleeves onto his arms, and quickly carried him off to the hospital, while sending an Anbu to inform the Hokage. That day had been the start of Naruto's independence, a full year earlier than had originally been planned. The old man sat down with Naruto in his office, and explaining the situation, gave Naruto the keys to a small apartment that the Hokage had rented out. The bills were all going to be covered, and a monthly allowance ensured that Naruto wouldn't go hungry. Anbu would be regularly stationed nearby the apartment to ensure Naruto's continued safety. Since it seems the head of the orphanage doesn't share my care for your well-being, Naruto, I've decided that it would be better for you if you were moved out of the orphanage. The Sandaime reached into a drawer in his desk and pulled out a ring with 3 keys on it. This first larger key is for the front door on your new apartment. My new apartment, murmured Naruto, slightly shocked at the speed this was all happening. I thought I was going to get it next year? He asked. Well, as I said, the orphanage didn't seem to offer you the proper protection that it should. So this apartment I'm giving you is just down the street from here, where I can see from this window. The Sandaime motioned towards the window to the side of his office, and I'll be able to see if any problems arise. I've also decided to take part of your monthly allowance. He had to hold his hands up to silence Naruto's coming protest, and use it to have D-ranked missions which will assign a team of genin to help you if need be. The young boy nodded dumbly, still shocked at the speed of things. He still wasn't sure about this. He already knew that some ninja didn't really want to help him. Sensing his concern, the Hokage gave Naruto a warm, grandfatherly smile and patted him on the shoulder. Don't worry Naruto, everything will be fine. If you want, I'll let you choose the genin team you want to help you. Naruto's shock, combined with the kindness that the old man was showing, made it difficult for Naruto to keep his voice straight. He barely managed to choke out a quiet, "Thanks, Oji-chan." The man gave another kindly smile, and pulled Naruto up. I need you to follow me for a bit Naruto, to show you what these other 2 keys go to, and then to show you to your new apartment. Naruto nodded, his head downward to hide the happy tears that threatened to come up, and set off with the Hokage, walking down stairs and several corridors until they reached a room on the first floor, in a room in the back. Along the wall were several small cabinets, about the size of a full-grown man's hand, all with their own little keyhole. The old man motioned towards them with his hand. These are used as small deposit boxes for various people. When packages for shinobi arrive, if they are out on a mission, it is kept here for them until they can pick it up. Sometimes shinobi ask to keep something important to them in these as well. I will be using it to put your monthly allowance in. You'll be picking it up on the first Tuesday of each month. Okay. Naruto, finally finding his once loud voice, whispered a quiet, "Okay, Oji-chan." But which one is mine? The Hokage pointed to one of the cabinets on the far right. You're going to have the cabinet number 109. Make sure you remember that well. Now, you know what 2 keys do, so why don't we go see your new apartment? I think you'll find what the 3rd key does over there. A 3-year-old Naruto finally gave a bright smile, and nodded happily. He followed the old man quickly down the main street, which ran from the southern gate directly to the Hokage Tower. Perpendicular to Main Street is Central, which formed a cross between the 2 streets in the middle of the village, allowing it to be divided in 4 quadrants. All along these 2 streets the ever-present clang of metal being forged rang through the air, and different shops shouted out their wares to ninja and shinobi alike. The smell of food wafted through the air, mixing with the salty smell of sweat from the ninjas' training, creating a scent-laden environment that was neither pungent nor heady, but simply home. The northeastern quadrant was where the people with funny eyes lived. Naruto didn't know this, but this area was dominated by the Uchiha and the Hyuga clans. The northwestern part of the village was dominated more by the Aburame, the Nara, and the Akamichi clans. The southern half on both sides was where most of the business was done, and where most of the villagers lived, as well as a few smaller ninja families. It was an apartment complex on the corner of Main and Central that the Hokage led Naruto to, across from the northeastern quadrant of the village. This is it, said the Hokage, opening a door for the young boy and gently pushing him in. Naruto's eyes quickly took in everything about the place. They had walked into what seemed to be the living room, dining room combination, where Naruto would be eating and relaxing. There was a couch immediately to his right, facing a small television, and an ottoman in front of it for him to put his feet up if he wanted. Connected to this room, but separate by a small counter, was the kitchen area, just large enough for him to cook if he needed. If he turned left just before reaching the kitchen, he would get into a small hallway which had 3 doors in it. 2 of them were bedroom-sized, and the 3rd was a bathroom at the end of the hall. Altogether it was a simple apartment, but it was more than Naruto had ever owned in his life. His eyes glistened with newly shed tears as he took it all in. He nearly failed to notice a small chest which was resting on top of the bed in his bedroom. Open it. The Hokage pushed him gently towards the chest, handing him the ring of keys. Naruto took one look back at the Hokage, before turning back around to the chest. Taking a deep breath, he took the third key on the rein, the one he had yet to discover the use for, and put it in the small matching keyhole. When he flung open the chest, he looked down to see books and scrolls, lots of them. And next to them kunai, shuriken, and a small beneath it all, a small neatly folded outfit. "I haven't forgotten how you told me once that you planned on taking my job," joked the Hokage. "So I bought you some ninja supplies and some things to help you learn a little about being a shinobi, so you'll be able to fulfill that dream." Naruto ran back to the old man and held him in a tight hug, burying his face in the old man's robes. The old man was probably the nicest person Naruto knew. He took care of him like he would his own son, and helped him whenever he could. Naruto swore that day, to pay back the Hokage for his kindness, to make sure he met the old man's expectations and made him proud, and to protect him the best he could. That was 10 years ago. Naruto was 13 now, a year older than his peers, and was just waking up inside the same apartment that had been given to him so long ago. The sun was shining through the window, warming the room, sending its wake-up call to the boy in the room. Naruto blinked, squinting against the sudden brightness, and sat up, yawning. He stretched his arms to get the feeling back in them. He had a bad habit of sleeping on top of them and cutting off the circulation, making for an odd feeling of numbness when he woke up. He climbed out of bed and looked at the time, 7:15, just enough time. He got his working clothes out, a newer and of course, larger pair of dark ninja clothes. In the exact same style as the pair the Hokage had given him so long ago. Naruto wouldn't have minded adding a splash more color though, for some flair, like orange or red if he could do it. But that was for another time when he had time to buy some clothes. Today was the day of the genin exams, and Naruto needed to be ready. He carried his clothes into the bathroom and got into the shower, cleaning himself off. He got out, and checked himself over in the mirror. No injuries, no dirt, squeaky clean. Good. He wanted to make sure he looked his best today. He quickly got dressed and made sure he had all the kunai and shuriken he could possibly need for the test, but found that his shuriken were missing. Naruto groaned and threw his head back in frustration, realizing he'd forgotten them at training grounds last night. By now they were probably already gone. He'd have to hurry and buy some new ones before he got to the academy. He knew he'd need some for the test, since he'd taken it once before. He ignored the dark muttering thoughts in his head when he thought of his failures. It was annoying how any negativity got him to think so darkly, sometimes with thoughts he was sure he'd never think if he was rational. Shaking himself out of his funk, he put a smile on his face. He found that even if he forced a smile, it helped his mood a bit. Something of a trick he'd learned over the years of. Well, enough of that. He grabbed some fruit that the old man had left in his kitchen and started down one of Central's side streets towards a shop he knew that sold ninja supplies. He normally didn't have to buy the supplies himself, instead using a genin team to get his stuff so that he wasn't kicked out of the store, but right now he didn't have time for that. The store he walked into finally was owned by an older man, younger than the old man, but this guy was still old. Naruto navigated his way around the cluttered shop, looking into various bins with simple kunai and shuriken, some higher grade than others. Around the edges of the shop were glass counters, with the better weapons the shop had to offer on display beneath the glass. Up on the wall behind the counters were even more weapons and supplies, ranging from weights to swords, to bit of armor. Naruto stopped by a bin with shuriken in his price range. They were neatly packaged in a bag of coarse material, and tied neatly together with a small thin metal chain. Naruto took 2 of the bags, numbering 20, and walked over to the counter where the old man sat with a book in his hand. He cleared his throat to get the man's attention, who, without looking at his customer, took the bag and checked the price. "That will be 50. The man cut off as he looked past the book and saw Naruto. 200 ryu, what? Exclaimed Naruto. But the price is clearly a quarter of that. I can demand whatever price I want, brat, it's my store. Who are you to threaten me and try to make me lower my price? The older man snarled as he leaned forward over the counter. Immediately Naruto went on the defensive, holding his hands up in front of him. I wasn't threatening, sir, but I was sure to check the price beforehand and I saw that it was only, you saw. The man shouted. Well, clearly you saw wrong, you little monster. And to think that you would even question me. Get out of my store, now. He shouted, raising his book up above his head and stepping past the counter towards Naruto. Naruto started to back up, quickly spewing apologies, before he bumped into someone behind him. Smelling a perfume, which Naruto found wasn't harsh on the nose. In fact, he wouldn't mind smelling it more often. Naruto turned to find a gorgeous woman with bright red eyes and raven dark hair. She looked to be around 18, give or take a year. She wore a Junin vest over a dress that looked like it wrapped around her voluptuous figure, which Naruto found that, similar to her perfume, wasn't harsh on the eyes. Naruto's eyes drifted from her legs up to her eyes, taking her in, before he realized she was looking at him, and their eyes met. For a brief moment, Naruto didn't know what to make of the woman. He would have run if he hadn't been stunned by her looks, and instead he stood there, mouth somewhat agape, his hands still held up defensively towards the old man and his book, and for a glorious moment, time stood still. Then their eye contact broke, and time flowed forward again. Air that had seemed to stop with time flowed again into Naruto's lungs as he inhaled sharply, and the woman reached out past Naruto and grabbed the old man's wrist, effectively stopped the book that was about to hit Naruto. "What are you doing?" the woman asked, her light melodic voice carrying a surprising amount of anger. "I'm teaching this brat a lesson," snarled the man. "I'd suggest you mind your own business. I have every right to refuse a demon like this service." Naruto remained silent during the exchange, flinching quietly at one of the commonly muttered nicknames he possessed amongst the villagers. He had a feeling he didn't want to make this lady any angrier. "Are you aware of the law you're breaking?" the woman asked, her eyes flashing dangerously. "This academy student is a citizen and future shinobi of Konoha. I walked into this store to see you overcharge him, as well as on the verge of attacking him, and you have no valid reason to do either. As far as I can see, he committed no crime." "Committed no crime?" screamed the man, spittle flying out of his mouth, which Naruto had to wipe off himself. "Are you mad?" The woman stepped past Naruto too quickly for him to see, slamming her fist into the man's chest, her knuckle digging up between the ribs, knocking the air out of the older man. He doubled over, his mouth flinging open in shock and pain. Spittle flew past his lips and his knees buckled as he sagged to the floor. The woman stood over him, her fist still where she had first hit the man, glaring down dangerously. Her gaze carried a multitude of barely concealed promises of future punishment. "If I ever see you acting this way towards any other citizen of Konoha, I will make sure that you will be visiting Konoha's center of inquiry." The man quickly translated it as "You'll be spending time in prison and having fun with the interrogators the next time." He nodded his head, still too hurt to speak, and laid there on the floor, desperately trying to inhale air into his lungs. The woman looked at Naruto, whom had taken an uncertain step away from the angered woman. She flashed him a brief smile, her red lips drawing the attention of his eyes, and hormone-filled brain much too quickly for his own liking. He purged the picture with an exaggerated image of Sakura, his crush. "Take the shuriken and anything else you need right now. I'll make sure the cost is covered properly. If I'm not mistaken, you're in this year's genin class, are you not?" she asked him. "Why, yes," stuttered Naruto, both out of shyness and fear of the woman. He hurriedly stuffed the shuriken into his pouch and got ready to leave when her question stalled him. "You are Uzumaki Naruto, are you not?" "Yeah." He turned back around to see her smiling again. "Yuahi KURENAI," she said simply. "Good luck in your exams, Naruto. The Hokage speaks highly of you. I hope his faith isn't misplaced." Naruto nodded, and gave his thanks. He knew he wouldn't let the Hokage down today. He'd be a genin tomorrow and ready to start on his journey to become Hokage. He walked through the dusty street as the village really began to wake up. The streets went from quiet, with stores just opening and empty, to swamped with people. People of all different shapes and sizes were walking up and down the streets, ninja visiting common haunts with their team for a mission or just to train, children played ninja, and civilians in clothes of every color walked around the streets to run errands for the day. Everything became more active. Naruto both loved the activity and hated it. It was good to be able to blend in with the crowd and try to avoid the glares. The only problem with more people, though, was there was always more glares from people who did see him. He thought back to his conversation with the old man when he had asked him why the villagers hated him so much. He remembered the conversation quite clearly. He was in the old man's office, just recently escaping a particularly vengeful woman, who kept trying to say that he'd killed her husband. Naruto knew he didn't, he had never killed anyone before. When he tried to explain that to her, she blew up, slapping him, and then chasing him down the street, snarling threats all the way. He was sitting across the desk from the old man, waiting patiently as he stuffed his pipe with tobacco and lit it, puffing a few times to get it lit, while gently pushing the tobacco with a pin to let it get the air it needed. When he had finally got the pipe sufficiently lit, he turned towards the boy, who began relating the recent story to him. The Hokage nodded at all the right times, asking questions when necessary, and showed genuine concern. "You're not hurt, are you?" he asked. "No, I'm okay," answered Naruto. I was hoping that nobody would attack you after the orphanage incident. I had put certain warnings out that I would deal a swift punishment to aggressive people in this village." The Hokage nodded solemnly with the thought of his laws, both the one to keep the Kyuubi's imprisonment a secret, and the law of a long visit with the Department of Inquiry with anyone who attacked Naruto. "Do you think you can tell me the lady's name?" asked the Hokage. The boy shook his head. He had been told by a few people that if he told the Hokage that he had to pay extra for things, or that he wasn't allowed to shop in certain stores, he'd pay. And he didn't want a repeat of the orphanage attack. Thankfully, there hadn't been. "Oji-chan?" Naruto tentatively asked. When the Hokage turned towards him, raising an eyebrow, he continued. It had been bothering him lately, but he had to know, and he didn't know who else to ask. He stumbled with his words for a moment, before blurting out, "Why does everyone hate me?" The man inhaled sharply, unfortunately causing his lungs to fill up with too much of the harsh tobacco too quickly, burning his throat in the process. He bent over and coughed sharply, the pipe falling out of his mouth onto the floor. He hadn't been expecting that question yet. He knew it was a foolish hope, but he had hoped that the young 7-year-old Naruto was still too naive to pick up on the fact that a large majority of the village hated him, rather than the small minority he would have the boy believe. He thought for a long moment before answering, allowing his throat and lungs to recover as well. "Naruto." He trailed off, not sure how to begin. Luckily, a stroke of brilliance hit him. This might be a little harsh for the boy, but it was much better than the full truth. Sometimes people have difficulty dealing with the emotions they have of the loss of a friend, or a wrong that has happened to them, and rather than learn to deal with these emotions and fix them, they project them onto others. You are the unfortunate target of many of these people, but when these people realize what a kind person you are, and perhaps even are helped by your kind heart, I'm sure many will see you for who you are, and will appreciate you as a great shinobi yourself. The day will come, Naruto, I promise you. The boy didn't seem to quite understand the mont's explanation, which was good, because the Hokage realized a little sourly, he may have said too much. Thankfully the boy nodded, and stood up to leave. "Oh, and Naruto?" The Hokage called him back to the desk and pulled out a coupon for Ichiraku's. "Go get yourself some lunch," he added with a smile. The boy gave a bright grin and nodded, before hurrying out of the office. Naruto's memory faded as he walked calmly in the direction of the Shinobi Academy. Darker thoughts began to fill his head. He couldn't stand people like that old man at the shop, and he dearly wished he could teach them a lesson. He would be powerful enough one day to do just that, and nobody would treat him that way again. For a moment the thoughts brought up the gorgeous red-eyed woman, and how she stood up for him, and oddly, Naruto forgot entirely about planning how he'd punish the shop owner. Instead, a real smile was on his face until abruptly a pink-haired girl knocked into him. Naruto fell back, just barely catching his balance, and blinked when he looked down to see Sakura on the ground, rubbing where she'd evidently been hurt by the fall. Sakura, his crush. Her pink hair picked up a shine from the newly risen sun, and he had the strange urge to run his hands through it, to see if it was as soft and silky as it appeared. His musings were cut short when green eyes scowled at him. "Naruto," she shouted. "Watch where you're going, Baka," he sighed. It was always like this. "Sorry Sakura-chan," he nearly whined. He hated being yelled at by his crush, since it hurt all the more. "You'd better be." She growled. "If I'm dirty now and Sasuke-kun won't talk to me because of it, there'll be hell to pay." Naruto gulped. Sakura really could be scary sometimes. She could be just as scary as that red-eyed woman when she was yelling at that old man. Naruto held out his hand to help Sakura up, which she promptly ignored, in favor of her friend Ino's hand. Naruto let the hand fall limply to his side, and watched as Sakura fixed her hair and brushed herself off. Ino fixed him with a glare of her own, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Don't worry about it, Naruto. This gives me a huge advantage today over Forehead Girl for Sasuke-kun's affection. Her eyes shone and she clasped her hands in front of her, thinking of her crush. Like hell it will, Ino pig. Shouted Sakura. It's not like you had a chance in the first place anyway, Forehead. Ino casually retorted. Naruto took a step back as the two glared at each other, sparks nearly flying from the collision of the two massive forces. How could Sasuke-kun ever like a pig like you? Asked Sakura. My forehead isn't as big. Responded Ino. Sakura bristled at the insult. My hair is a prettier color. She retorted. Ino was quick with her own valid point. My hair is longer. We both know Sasuke-kun likes long hair. I'm smarter in class. Sasuke-kun likes a more intelligent girl. Sakura said. But he also likes a more competent ninja, which I'm afraid to say, Forehead Girl, is me. Naruto sighed, realizing that he was already long forgotten by the two kunoichi. It wasn't an uncommon occurrence, but rather something he was quite used to. Almost every time these two were in the same room as Sasuke, it was like nothing else existed except for him. Without Sasuke, all they cared about was which was better than the other. He turned back around from the other two, and continued on to the academy. He had bigger concerns. When Naruto finally entered the classroom, his hands clasped behind his head, he looked up to see the usual chatter among the 27 students in his class. Sakura and Ino had arrived a few moments after him, and had already started quarreling over who would be sitting next to Uchiha Sasuke, the #1 rookie of the year, and the sole survivor of the Uchiha clan. At the sight of the raven-haired boy, wearing his normal blue t-shirt with the Uchiha fan adorning it and his normal shorts, Naruto clenched his fists together, grimacing. Sasuke was his rival, in his eyes, the boy he had to do better than, to prove that he could beat. Sensing his look, Sasuke turned towards Naruto, and with a huff of apparent disinterest, he turned away, gazing out the window to his left. Naruto had been training though, and knew that although the Uchiha certainly had talent, it wasn't like Naruto hadn't done anything with the tools the old man had given him years ago. He trained, and trained quietly. Naruto also had an extra year on all of the genin in his class, having stayed back an extra year to make sure he was ready. That, and he did accidentally mess up the Bunshin technique in the exam last year. That was the only technique he couldn't do though, which frustrated Naruto to no end. For some reason, regular Bunshins were a real problem for him. His fighting skills were sharper than most of the genin, however, he had a little more experience than them, after all. And kunai and weapons? Naruto had practiced them every day ever since the old man had given him his first set. Weapons were easy once you got the hang of them. Needless to say, Naruto was definitely ready for the exam today, and then he'd show the Uchiha. Behind him was Akamichi Choji and Nara Shikamaru. Like many of Naruto's classmates that were in clans this year, they were the heirs to their respective clan. Shikamaru and Choji weren't bad guys. Naruto thought they were both pretty easygoing in fact, and he wouldn't mind being on their teams after the exam. Choji was a larger boy, who could usually be seen eating, often some form of chips. He needed to do this for his clan techniques evidently, as his clan used their sizes to their advantage in a fight, and the food not only made them bigger, but helped replenish their chakra. Shikamaru, to put it simply, was a wonderfully lazy, but terribly smart kid. One wouldn't be able to tell from his grades, but Shikamaru had one of the sharpest minds of the bunch. He usually cloud-watched and liked to sleep in class. Admirable interests, if Naruto said so himself. Next to them was another boy, who Naruto couldn't quite remember. He wasn't utterly significant. He didn't seem to have anything remarkable about him skill-wise, and was a first-generation shinobi. Behind that row of the seats in the far back were 3 more important clan members of the village, and people that Naruto had gotten to know over the years. Inazuka Kiba, Aburame Shino, and Hyuga Hinata. When his eyes met with Hinata's, she turned red and looked away quickly. He never could figure out what he did to make her so angry. But then, she was a Hyuga, and as he'd found out, Hyugas had little respect for him. She possessed a Kakei Genkei, an ability that was only passed on through blood. Hers was a little special, just like Sasuke Tomi's. She had a dujutsu called the Byakugan, which enabled her to see his chakra pathways and attack them with her clan's taijutsu style, the Jukin. Kiba was, to put it shortly, loud, obnoxious, and overconfident. Though, Naruto had to admit, he had similar moments. Kiba always had his dog with him, Akamaru, which would fight alongside Kiba in every fight. They were extreme close partners, knowing each other from an early age, and were always together. Aburame Shino was quiet. He was also incredibly intelligent, as far as Naruto could tell. Either that, or he thought very carefully before speaking, because nothing unintelligent ever seemed to come out of his mouth. In fact, he never seemed to speak unless it was important. His clan used Kikai bugs to fight. They allowed the bugs to inhabit their body, eating their chakra, in return for their services in a fight. Naruto wasn't sure how effective the bugs could be, but he was sure it had to have more benefits than he realized if an entire clan was based on this ability. The rows in the middle of the class were mainly first-generation shinobi, who were actually the sons and daughters of the villagers, and were the first family members to enter the academy and try to become shinobi. Like Naruto, he supposed. Though Naruto wasn't sure, his dad may have been a shinobi. Or his mom for that matter. Concerns for later in life though, when he was out of the academy and on his way to being a famous Konoha shinobi. The far 3 rows on the very left side of the class were likewise not from important families as far as he knew, although he was familiar with a few of them. Amy, for one, and her 2 friends sitting next to her. All he knew about them was that they didn't like Sakura, and had started the name, Big Forehead Girl. For that reason alone, he didn't bother with them. Below them in the middle were 2 guys and a girl, the one of the guys he recognized as Daichi, a boy who had amazing skills with kunai and was pretty high up in the class grade-wise, probably just below Shino. In front of them were another 3 shinobi that Naruto didn't know that well, but it didn't matter even if he wanted to know them anyway, since he could see them all pointing at him and laughing. Naruto fixed them a stupid grin and walked past them to sit by Shikamaru and Choji, filling in the only empty seat, as Ino and Sakura had compromised on the row in front to both sit by Sasuke, though Sakura was closer. He'd show all of them soon how much he knew. "Hey Naruto, I'm surprised you even bothered to show up," jeered Kiba. "After all, I'd heard you failed the last time." Before Naruto could retort, Iruka walked in, slamming a stack of papers onto the desk. "Quiet," he shouted over all the talking. The class immediately quieted down, and Iruka took a deep breath before continuing. "Today is this year's annual Genin exam." He looked around at the class to gauge everyone's reactions. They all appeared collected. A few seemed to be a little nervous. Uchiha Sasuke fixed him with a confident smirk. "I expect all of you to do well. For many of you, this is your first time taking the exam. For those of you who are taking it for a second time, I hope the extra practice has prepared you sufficiently." He glanced at Naruto, which unfortunately many of the class seemed to catch. "Whoops, didn't mean to do that," thought the Chunin, giving Naruto an apologetic look, as some in the class snickered. "The exam will consist of a short written exam, which I'm sure many of you have prepared for. However, this will only count for 1/6 of the test. The majority of the test will be outside, when it comes to shuriken and kunai targeting counting for 1/6 each, as well as ninjutsu testing in bunshin, kawarimi, and henge each counting for 1/6 themselves. You will need at least 4/6 or 66 in order to pass the exam," explained Iruka. "This test is to make sure that you have the minimum proficiency in academy-level skills. An ideal ninja would be able to get 100% on tests, showing proficiency in all areas. However, that is a little much to expect of a genin fresh out of the academy, so we are more forgiving. All genin who pass this exam however are expected to practice the skills they did poorly in until they have complete mastery over the skill." He continued. Naruto felt a wad of paper hit him in the side of the head, and turned to see one of the kids he didn't know very well smirking at him. He sighed, ignoring the kid. He had already failed the exam twice. Once he had tried to take it early when he was 11 to graduate ahead. He'd failed to do that since he wasn't ready yet and instead continued on and tried to take it when he should at age 12. Of course, he had a bad stroke of luck and somehow messed up with the written and the bunshin. While the first one he didn't count because it was taken early, the second one was a little embarrassing. He'd been pushed back a year then to this class, made up of primarily 12-year-olds and ready to graduate. This year would be different, he promised. He had to make sure the Hokage knew he could depend on him to follow through. An image of the red-eyed Junin came into his head, wishing him luck. He grew determined, and got ready to give this test his all. While Bunshin was still impossible for him for whatever reason, Kourimi and Henge he could manage fine now, and Kunai and Shuriken were easy that would give him at least the minimum 4/6 score. The written test would be the issue. If he could answer them, then everything would be okay with a 5/6, a respectable score at least. Naruto looked back at Iruka as the Chunin instructor walked to the door of the classroom to answer a knock. Today Mizuki-sensei will be helping me proctor the test to make sure none of you are cheating, and to make sure everything goes by quickly and smoothly, announced Iruka. The man who walked in wasn't unfamiliar at all. He had helped Iruka teach his lessons many times before, normally as an assistant, and he seemed nice enough. He had shoulder-length silver hair and had a ready smile for most of the class. He waved to them and gave them a simple, "Good luck everyone. Hopefully by tomorrow you will all be genin." With that, Iruka and Mizuki divided up the tests and began to hand them out to the class. There were 3 different versions of the test. Each person on a table had a different version to prevent cheating. Shikamaru had version A, Choji version B, and Naruto version C. "You have exactly 45 minutes to finish this test," announced Iruka, looking at his watch. "Mizuki and I will be walking amongst you to make sure nobody is cheating." Naruto ducked his head and looked at the questions. They were fairly simple, if the first 3 of them were any measurement. Number 1. State ninja rule number 25, and explain its importance to today's ninjas in the field. Number 2. Explain what chakra is. Number 3. Explain what a Hokage is, and what important role this person fulfills in the fire country. Naruto quickly answered the 20-question test, with 10 minutes to spare. As he thought, they weren't difficult, and he had little trouble. He looked up to see Mizuki looking at him oddly, before he continued on. Perhaps he didn't think Naruto would be able to do this test. He looked around at his classmates in his free time, curious to see how everyone was doing. Shikamaru was sleeping on his desk, the pencil beside him. Naruto wasn't even sure if he'd done the test at all or not, since his paper was turned over. Choji was filling out the questions pretty easily it seemed, taking his time with each one and eating a bag of potato chips in between questions. Shino and Hinata were already done, and Kiba was smirking as he wrote his answers down. Sakura and Sasuke and Ino were all already finished as well. His half of the class seemed to be doing fairly well. The middle portion of the class seemed to have a lot of people sweating bullets, and the third portion of the class opposite of Naruto seemed to be doing well. Altogether the class seemed to be having few problems. Naruto knew though that the ninjutsu would crush a lot of hopefuls, as would the targeting test. After the test they all walked outside to complete the targeting in the training grounds. They lined up and were all told to have 5 shuriken and 5 kunai ready. They each stepped up in turn and tried to hit the 5 bullseyes on the targets for each of the weapons. Naruto glared when Sasuke decided to show off and throw all 5 of each at the same time, 5 kunai with one hand and 5 shuriken with the other, and nailed all of the kunai. "Sasuke-kun is so cool," squealed one of his fangirls. Again, Naruto's half of the class seemed to do fairly better than the rest, with the exception of Daichi, who pulled off the same feat as Sasuke, though with much less fanfare afterwards. "Uzumaki Naruto," called out Iruka. "It's your turn." Naruto nodded and stepped forward, preparing his kunai. He decided to finish it carefully rather than showy like Sasuke, and took careful aim. This would be easy. Mizuki watched as the yellow-haired genin got ready. He couldn't stand the fact that this demon brat was taking this exam, much less allowed into the academy. But it would be over his dead body if the boy ever passed this exam. He glanced at Iruka. How could the man forgive the brat after what he'd done all those years ago? Couldn't he see he was a demon? Mizuki knew he'd have to take care of this himself. Iruka was too loyal to fail the boy purposely. Behind his back, he made a few hand seals. Naruto took a deep breath and threw his kunai first, quickly but carefully. He nodded as he saw them travel to exactly where he aimed them, but abruptly laughter broke out from the students behind him. Naruto blinked, and realized he'd missed the training targets completely? All 5 of his kunai were in the dirt several yards behind where the targets were. How could that be? He could have done this blindfolded. Iruka got the class to quiet down while Naruto shook himself and pulled out the shuriken. He'd make sure that these ones hit. Maybe Iruka would be a little kind and still pass him if he got all bullseyes with the shuriken. He took another calming breath and released his shuriken. This was it. These were sure to hit, he was sure. What the? Again, all of his airborne weapons missed the targets completely and landed off in the dirt past the targets. The class all laughed again, and jeers of "Doby" and "Nice aim, dead last" were shouted from the students. Naruto hung his head in shame, too embarrassed to look at his classmates. He did, however, notice Shino and Shikamaru looking at him oddly. How had he missed? What did I do wrong? He thought to himself. When the class had finally calmed down, they were all told to line up in the hallway outside their regular classroom while each student stepped inside to complete testing. As Naruto's name was called, he took a step inside to see Iruka and Mizuki sitting and smiling at him. "Okay, Naruto, I'm going to need you to perform a henge to look like me, a kawurimi, as well as 2 bunshin," said Iruka. Naruto nodded and performed the henge. Iruka nodded and marked something down on his clipboard. After the kawurimi, it was the same thing. Then they reached the bunshin. I can do this, thought Naruto fiercely. He had to pull off a bunshin, or he'd only have a 3/6, that is, if he passed the written. 3/6 was not a passing grade. He took a deep calming breath, checking to make sure he was doing the hand seals right. He made the seal and channeled the chakra into the technique. A cloud of smoke poofed up on either side of him, and Naruto looked at each, trying to see if he'd done it correctly. The moment seemed to take forever though as the smoke slowly cleared, allowing him to see 2 clones that were pale and malformed, resembling a sickly, mangled body more than Naruto himself. Naruto. Iruka sighed, disappointment clearly in his voice. You failed. The words rang through the room, stabbing into Naruto's heart like kunai. After trying so hard, after practicing so much, and after so many promises to the Hokage, he still failed. Naruto hung his head, too ashamed to look up and meet Iruka's eyes, or notice the slight smirk on Mizuki's face. He walked out of the room to where other students were still waiting for their turns to take the exam. He ignored the questions of, how'd it go, and laughter from those who realized he'd failed, and he kept walking, far past his classmates, outside onto the swing. He sat there for what seemed like forever, watching as the kids who passed were gathering outside the front door to the academy, waiting for their proud parents to pick them up, smiling at their child's success. He ignored some of the whispers he heard from the older crowd, about how they were glad he failed. He caught a few passing sympathetic glances, but it did little to subside his sadness. Again his thoughts turned darker, his thoughts began to be clouded by ideas and images, suggesting he take control and show he was better than them. He saw a woman glaring at him from the crowd of his classmates, and he glared back, putting all his hatred he could into his eyes, and received a approving murmur in his thoughts when the woman flinched back. This was how Mizuki found Naruto, on the swing, his legs barely touching the ground beneath him as killer intent rolled off the small genin in waves towards some of the older villagers in the crowd. He stopped for a moment, wishing he could kill the boy now and be done with it, but he had to wait. The demon could live till tonight, after he'd served his purpose. The older man put his hand on Naruto's shoulder, and when the boy looked up behind him at the smiling Chunin, Mizuki put his plan into action. You know Naruto, Iruka only made that decision because he wants you to grow into a strong ninja for the leaf. You shouldn't let it discourage you. The boy nodded glumly for a moment before turning away to think things over. But Mizuki wasn't done yet. Wait, Naruto. You can prove to Iruka that you're ready to become a genin now if you are determined enough. This stopped the boy in his tracks, and he excitedly turned around towards Mizuki. How, Mizuki-sensei? The Chunin smiled to himself. This is too easy. There is a second, less common way to become a genin. It was what the villages used to do in the days before academies. All you have to do is prove your skills in the field. To do this, there is a scroll in the Hokage's tower that is kept there in a special room, guarded by genjutsu and traps. In the old days, it was traditional for the aspiring ninja to take this scroll out of the tower and learn at least one skill from the scroll, and deliver it to the Chunin, testing him without the Hokage, or other ninjas in the village stopping him. So I need to take a scroll from the Hokage tower and learn something from it. I can do that. I'll go get it now, declared Naruto, about to hurry off to the tower. Mizuki quickly pulled the boy back. Not yet. He snarled. Realizing he may have come on a bit strongly, he calmed himself down. A few tips for you. Do it tonight when less people are around. Then when you get this scroll, which will be on the 3rd floor of the Hokage Tower at the far end of the hall, you'll head northwards into the forest behind the Hokage monuments. You'll find an old shack in a clearing about 5 minutes in. I'll be waiting there for you. He winked and walked away from the boy, happy with himself for his ingenious plan. Hours later, after Naruto had planned his entire route through the Hokage Tower, and even scouted out the building earlier, the young academy student dropout hurried over the rooftops along Main Street until he reached the tower. He jumped from one of the roofs onto a ledge on top of the 2nd floor and gently opened one of the windows. After climbing in, he found he was one room over too far from where he planned to enter, but it didn't matter much. He went out into the hall and climbed up the stairs, carefully checking for any other ninja in the building. He'd heard conversations going on down a few halls, but never actually ran into anyone. When he'd finally got up to the 3rd floor in the main hall, he headed down to the far end, towards the only door with several locks on it. It had to be that one. His original plan had been to head through the door and avoid the traps, but seeing the locks on the door, he realized he wouldn't be able to pick the locks properly. He made a mental note to learn how to do that properly, and came up with a new plan. The ceiling on the hallway was made of individual panels, held together by thin metal strips. If he jumped and pushed off the wall to reach the ceiling, he found that he could push the panels aside pretty easily. When he pushed one away entirely, he saw that there was room enough for him to crawl in, with more to spare. He pushed off the wall again mid-jump, and clung onto the ceiling with his fingers. Pulling himself up, he was glad to see that he could just squeeze by and get past the point where the door was below him. He crawled past that point where he thought the door was and continued until he was on the far side of the room. He carefully put his nails into the small divides between the panels and picked up one of them, sliding it out of the way as he did so. He dropped down out of the new opening in the ceiling and replaced the panel to where it should have been. He looked at his new surroundings. The entire room was surrounded with scrolls and several weapons and books. He inspected the walls near the door he had been planning on entering through and saw several tripwires attached nearby, as well as a trap that was set to go off as soon as the door began to enter. Idly, he wondered how someone was really supposed to enter the room. He wasn't sure how someone could disable the traps from the other side of the door. Either way, it didn't matter. He looked towards the scroll that Mizuki had described to him, with purple markings on the outer edges, along. Unrolling it, he found the techniques that Mizuki had described. Wow, some of these are really cool techniques. He looked down for one that looked like he could learn. Kage Bunshin. Beneath the jutsu was its description. Rank. A class jutsu. Description. Allows the user to make solid bunshins to deal and receive damage while dividing chakra reserves equally. The bunshins have their own level of intelligence, corresponding to that of the user. A primary advantage of the Kage Bunshin is that all newly acquired knowledge by the bunshins is transferred to the user upon dispelling. Technique was banned by Shodem Hokage. Naruto glanced around furtively, and saw a window with several traps attached to it as well. Rather than climbing through the ceiling passages and dropping down into a hallway with guards possibly walking by, Naruto just cut the traps and jumped out the window. He landed on the roof of a nearby building and ended in a roll. Getting up, he hurried into a run to the north, towards the Hokage monument. When he'd entered the forest, he paused for a moment in a clearing, before he reached where Mizuki would be waiting for him. He had to make sure he learned at least one skill from the scroll. Opening it, he quickly scanned for techniques that he could probably use. The Kage Bunshin one from before had interested him, and he quickly found it again. He read through the proper hand seals and the way to gather your chakra, and finally settled down to practice. A full hour later, he already memorized the workings behind the technique, and although Naruto wasn't sure how many clones he was supposed to be able to make, he could easily make a couple hundred. Hey, this technique isn't that hard. I can't wait to see the look on everyone's face when they see me use this. He suddenly had the odd idea to copy down these techniques, and practice them as he pleased later. Not seeing any harm in this, Naruto quickly scanned through a few techniques for ones that looked interesting. Lower Covenant Technique. Rank. S-Class Jutsu Description. While the full uses are generally unknown, the jutsu is said to allow the user to contact and The words were smudged here, in return for the, and smudged here as well. The exact method of carrying out the jutsu is unclear. Shoden Hokage banned the use of this jutsu after Uchiha Madara's questionable use. In the following fight at the Valley of the End, Naruto frowned at the smudged portions of the scroll, wishing the scroll wasn't so damaged that the description was illegible, as well as the scroll having the full directions of having the technique. Instead, it had a vague description of the possible seals and the chakra manipulation. Apparently, the person who wrote this scroll didn't know how to do the jutsu themselves. Either way, Naruto was eager to have the chance to learn an S-class jutsu, so he quickly wrote it down, promising himself to look up more information on the jutsu later. After he wrote down the first technique, he immediately saw another powerful technique, piquing his interest. Berserker technique. Rank. A class jutsu description. Originally an Inuzuka technique, the Berserker jutsu creates an effect similar to opening the gates at a greater cost. Using this jutsu results in an increase in the user's bloodlust, reaction rate, strength, and a minimal increase in speed, at a high cost in chakra and life force. Technique may also kill user if the person is wounded greatly. Banned by decree of Shoden Hokage and Naidame Hokage in agreement with Inuzuka clan head, after increasing losses in Inuzuka clan. One of the lower ones caught Naruto's eye. It was written in a different handwriting than the rest, and at the bottom Naruto found why. Old Man Hokage banned this one. Shiki Fuin. Rank. S-class sealing jutsu. Description. Created by the Yondaime, this is perhaps the most dangerous, as well as the most powerful sealing technique. It calls upon the Shinigami itself to seal the soul of any target into an object, at the cost of the user's life. After its use 13 years ago, and the Yondaime's subsequent death because of its use, the Sandaime decreed that it would be permanently banned from use unless a dire emergency. 13 years ago? That was with the Kyuubi, muttered Naruto. Suddenly a huge torrent of images came to his head, unbidden. He saw a gigantic frog, with a man in Hokage robes standing on top, and then a bright flash of light blinding him. Along with the image came an extreme amount of anger, which fled as quickly as the image. Whoa! What was that? Wondered Naruto. He looked over the technique, but decided to pass by it instead, disturbed by the vision he had after reading about it, and went to look for a different technique instead. He was about to copy down a third when he heard someone coming. Probably Mizuki. He quickly put his copies away, and got ready to hand the scroll over to his sensei. To his surprise, Iruka dropped down in front of him. He looked angry. Very angry. Naruto, he shouted, Iruka-sensei. Naruto grinned. Oh man, I got caught already? I thought Mizuki-sensei was going to show up, but I guess I'll show you instead. I only got to learn one technique though, Mizuki. Questioned Iruka. What are you talking about, Naruto? Hand over the forbidden scroll and I'll see if I can get the Hokage to go easy on you. What? I'm being punished? Asked Naruto. Of course you are. Screamed Iruka. You stole the forbidden scroll from the Hokage tower. Naruto was shocked. But, what? I thought if I took this scroll from the Hokage tower without being caught and learned one of the techniques, you'd graduate me. It was Iruka's turn to be shocked. Who said that? He asked. Mizuki-sensei, of course. Shouted Naruto. He told me about this scroll and this place to practice everything. Now let me show you this really great technique, Iruka-sensei. He put his hands together in an unfamiliar seal. Cage, he began, just as Iruka saw a glint of metal in the trees out of the corner of his eye. Naruto, get down! Shouted Iruka, shoving the young student out of the way. Naruto didn't know what was happening. One minute he was about to graduate, and the next he was being attacked, and Iruka took the blow for him, covering Naruto with his own body. Naruto could see several kunai impaling his academy instructor. A voice drifted out from the trees. I'm surprised you found out about this place. Mizuki jumped into view on a tree branch. I see, so that's how it is. Iruka growled, gritting his teeth in pain. Naruto, hand over the scroll, said Mizuki, ignoring the Chunin for a moment. Hey. What's going on here? Asked Naruto, thoroughly confused. Naruto, don't let him get the scroll, no matter what. That's a dangerous scroll that has forbidden techniques. Mizuki used you so he could get a hold of it. Gasped Iruka as he yanked the kunai out of himself. Mizuki realized things were quickly going downhill. Time to spin some distrust between the genin and his academy instructor. Naruto, Iruka is afraid of you having that scroll. Let me tell you the truth. A rule was created after the incident 12 years ago. It's a rule that only you, Naruto, can't find out about. What are you talking about? Asked Naruto. Stop it, Mizuki, yelled Iruka, still incapacitated by the kunai. It's a rule to not say that you are the demon fox. Shouted Mizuki. In other words, you are the nine-tailed demon fox who attacked the village and killed so many. Didn't you think it was weird for everyone to hate you so much? Suddenly the more images came to Naruto, who held his head at the sudden pain and anger he felt. A great set of eyes behind a cage glared down at him, a giant set of teeth shining in the darkness. The teeth opened and let out a huge roar, before snapping him. The image ended and another came, a nine-tailed fox slaughtering shinobi, swatting them away like flies, and roaring with rage. A raging voice came to his head, sounding awfully similar to the dark thoughts Naruto would sometimes have while depressed. So you can hear me, whelp. Kill him, it boomed, rip the silver-haired man to shreds and show him my Jinchuriki's power. When Naruto only sat there, clutching his head, the voice continued. Yes, it is my voice you have been hearing all these years. How pathetic that you never realized it. But I will settle this later. For now, live and kill. Mizuki threw his Fuma shuriken at Naruto, who could only stand, too lost in the hurricane of thoughts to do anything about it. Duck, Naruto! Yelled Iruka, who had finally freed himself from the kunai. He dived in front of the kunai and protected Naruto with his body, and Naruto, who was snapped out of his trance, could only look up and ask, "Why?" "Because you're the same as me," answered the Chunin, coughing up blood. "When my parents died, no one was there to care for me or compliment me, so I acted like the clown to get attention." It was tough, wasn't it, Naruto? Tears welled up in the Chunin's eyes as he thought of the lives he and Naruto have lived. If I had been more aware, I could have saved you from such a tough life. Mizuki chuckled cruelly. Don't make me laugh. Iruka has hated you since you killed his parents. He just wants to get that scroll back. Naruto broke off into a run, fleeing from the two Chunins. Iruka could only cry out his name, as Mizuki laughed, promising to kill the demon fox and take the scroll from himself. I'm glad I used that genjutsu to make the brat fail his targeting. Otherwise I never would have had this chance to use him and to kill him afterwards. Mizuki put a dark sneer on his face. I'll deal with you later, Iruka. Mizuki changed himself into Iruka and found Naruto running with the scroll strapped to his back. Naruto, give me the scroll. Mizuki just wants it for himself, he yelled. He was surprised when Naruto turned and hit him in the stomach, dispelling his henge. How did you know it was me? Mizuki asked. I'm Iruka. Answered the Naruto doppelganger who dispelled his henge, showing Iruka in its place. I see. Said Mizuki. What's the point in protecting the monster who killed your parents? There's no way Naruto, the monster fox wouldn't use the scroll's powers. You're right. Answered Iruka. The monster fox would do that. But Naruto isn't the fox. He's a hard-working student that I care about. HMPH. I know I said I'd kill you later, Iruka. Began Mizuki, pulling out a second Fuma shuriken. But I've changed my mind. He was about to release the shuriken, killing Iruka, when Naruto quickly jumped out, slamming a kick into the Chunin's side, throwing his aim off. Don't lay a finger on Iruka-sensei, warned Naruto. Or I'll kill you. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Thousands of clones filled the clearing, and Mizuki could only look on helplessly, as the clones began to charge. After it was all done, and Mizuki lay on the ground defeated, Iruka called Naruto over. Naruto, close your eyes. When Naruto opened them, Iruka tied his own Konoha forehead protector onto Naruto's forehead. Congratulations, Naruto. Thanks for watching guys.